Welcome, thanks for joining us. My name is Sue Gallo. I'm the volunteer coordinator with the Champaign County Forest Preserve District. Amanda Christensen from the East Central Illinois Master Naturalist Program is going to manage the technical details, and I'll try to MC and collect the questions. We begin by recognizing and acknowledging that we are on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Meskwaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. As a land-grant institution, the University of Illinois, with which the Master Naturalist Program is affiliated, has a particular responsibility to acknowledge the peoples of these lands, as well as the histories of dispossession that have allowed for the growth of this institution for the past 150 years. We are also obligated to reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. This acknowledgement and the centering of Native peoples is a start as we move forward for the next 150 years. The Central Illinois Master Naturalist Program and the volunteer program of the Champaign County Forest Preserve District are delighted to offer this opportunity for curious and engaged individuals and ecology-minded volunteers from across the state, a chance to ask the state biologist and hear answers and insights into Illinois natural history and the Illinois Natural History Survey with INHS Director and Illinois State Biologist, Dr. Eric Schauber. Dr. Schauber is actively engaged in research with mammal populations in Illinois, in addition to his role as Director of the Natural History Survey. He was appointed Illinois State Biologist in 2019, a role he views as important to help transfer information between scientists, land managers, policymakers, and the public. When Dr. Schauber is not doing research or directing the INHS or being the state biologist, he enjoys hiking and fixing old outboard motors. And with that, if Eric is ready, we'll turn over screen and microphone control to him.
Okay. Thank you, Sue and Amanda, very much for inviting me to speak with you all today. And I am, in putting this talk together, it really just sort of drove home how ridiculous it is to be named the state biologist, and yet what an amazing privilege and a wonderful job it is. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of a PowerPoint here and start off telling you a little bit about me and how I came to be here. Then I'm going to talk a bit more about the Illinois Natural History Survey, and I am going to get into some of the questions that people have submitted already, and then also open the floor for some new questions in the chat going along here. So there's my outline. That's also this outline also indicates when polls are going to be. I'm going to be prompting you all to work on some of the polls questions here. So after I talk about myself, I'm going to ask you to tell me a little bit about yourselves. And then after I talk about Illinois Natural History Survey, I'll ask a little bit about your familiarity with us and what we do. So let's move on from there. Unfortunately, a lot of my job right now is administrative, so I don't get to take as many of these cool pictures as I used to, but as you might suspect, I'm somebody who's been interested in nature for a very long time. Some of my drawings my mom still has that I drew when I was like 6 is like, I've got a bird on this arm and a bat dangling from this arm, and I'm standing in a lake with plankton and all this other stuff. So field guides were some of the first books I read. So it's not too surprising to anybody who knew me that I would end up in something related to biology. Professionally, how did I get here? You might ask, especially being that I grew up in the Northeast. And I tell people that I tried both coasts and sort of split the difference and ended up here. I grew up in New York and Massachusetts, went to UMass Amherst for my undergraduate, and got to some really great research experiences, including cool things like bears, birds, gypsy moths, and lots of other things. Then I did my master's degree at Oregon State University, spent 3 years out there studying the effects of pesticides and mowing on small mammals living in agricultural fields. Then I went back to the East Coast to the University of Connecticut to work on my doctoral degree, continuing work on small mammals, in this case, looking at them as what I call hub species. And I'll talk a little bit about them in a minute. And that fieldwork was done at a place called the Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies in upstate New York. Then I got a real job at SIU Carbondale, and was a professor and wildlife ecologist there for 16 years, doing research on everything from mice to deer, and then joined the Illinois Natural History Survey in 2018. As Sue sort of indicated, I'm primarily a wildlife ecologist. So again, when I say Illinois biologist, biology is enormous. It's everything from algae and plants and mushrooms to insects. And, so my own expertise is relatively narrow within that, but I do consider myself pretty much a generalist. The picture of me with the chipmunk kind of indicates why. So first off, here I am with a bear and an otter and a deer, these big kind of cool looking animals. Can you guess which of these animals is the only one that's injured me? That's right, it's the chipmunk. So chipmunks, by the way, are incredibly feisty, and they all know judo. If you do not, and they also have a very, very little extra skin on their neck. So it takes a very careful hold to get just the right amount of skin and not so little that they can flip around with their hind foot and then wrench their teeth into your thumb. So, but chipmunks and mice, which I studied, are really, I think, one of the coolest animals out there because they are sort of a conduit. And they transfer fluctuations in one part of their system to other parts. And how does that work? Well, they eat lots of things, but one of the things they rely on a lot is acorns and nuts as food to carry them over the winter. And acorns and nuts, if you are observant, you've probably noticed that some years the trees produce a ton of them, and some years the trees produce very few. And what that means is that these animals are being alternately fed so that their populations can explode, and then starved. And so their populations go up and down. Some years there's lots of mice and chipmunks, some years there's much fewer. And because they are kind of the gummy bear of the woods and everything likes to eat them, and everything that doesn't eat them is what they eat, that means that this signal of them bouncing up and down because of the nuts gets transferred to everything else. They eat gypsy moths, and which are a major invasive species in the Northeast. And so if you have a couple years of low acorn production, the mouse population drops. That can allow gypsy moths to reach an outbreak level where they're defoliating the trees. They're also predators on the eggs and baby chicks of ground nesting birds. And so after a couple years of heavy acorn production, that can really have an impact on those other species trying to live in the same environment. And then finally, white-footed mice are one of the primary hosts that carry the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. And so when there's lots of mice in the woods, lots of ticks feed on mice, they get that bacteria, and then it can get transferred to people. So these connections actually link human health to the reproductive behavior of trees. And when I say I'm a wildlife ecologist there, that's sort of what I mean. I really like to study these interactions between wild animal populations, other species in their environment, and the non-living parts of their environment as well. And so I use approaches that rely on a lot of data and also modeling to look at this. And all of these pictures, as you can see, with mammals, but obviously ticks are arthropods, gypsy moths are insects, plants like oak trees. And I've also looked at this phenomenon of boom and bust seeding in plants in other parts of the world, like New Zealand. I've looked at birds, I've looked at lizards. So I've done a fair number of things beyond just mammals. Which helps me, I think, to understand some of the cool science that's being done by people who are really experts in these other fields that I am not an expert in. And then below here are the things that I like to do non-professionally. So I like to take pictures. I like birding, hiking, fishing, hunting, herping, which is looking for reptiles and amphibians, insect collecting, mushrooming, wildflowers, and peeking under rocks. So this is a good opportunity to invite you all to open up the little poll icon there at the bottom of your screen and indicate what kinds of activities you like to participate in as well. So I'm going to click on mine. And I can see all of you folks in here. Very cool.
All right.
While the answers are kind of coming in there, I wanted to talk a little bit about just sort of, how I got into, I've been interested in animals for a long time. But it was really a volunteer experience that got me into research in wildlife biology, and that was at UMass Amherst, where there's a population of spotted salamanders that lives on a hill and breeds in a pond, as they do, and there's a road in between. And locals for years on the warm, rainy nights of spring when the salamanders would come to the pond to mate had stayed up all night, blocking traffic and helping these salamanders across. And shortly before I started college, Mass Audubon Society had put in tunnels underneath the road to ease the passage of the salamanders. And one of the things that they were very concerned about was people, not shining headlights at the salamanders. So everything was very, red cellophane over the lenses and being very quiet. But one night the salamanders weren't terribly excited about moving. And late in the night, one of the biologists, just on a whim, took the cellophane off his flashlight and stuck it at the far end of the tunnel. And the salamanders just charged through and put their nose on the lens and then went around to the pond. And then the next year I was involved in a study where one year they had a light on one tunnel and one year on another, not on the other tunnel, and they switched back and forth and demonstrated pretty conclusively that salamanders are actually looking for the light, which, one of these things that in retrospect makes lots of sense. But we were thinking the exact opposite at the time. And being there at that moment of discovery of something that was counterintuitive was really kind of led me on the path that I am now. So it's great to see the responses that we got here, bird watching and hiking, trail running, and photography. And not surprisingly, volunteering in natural areas seem to be very important to you all. So thanks for sharing a bit about how you ended up here today. All right.
Do we want to do the next poll?
Yeah, what's the next poll?
The natural areas.
Yes, sorry. Go ahead from there. All right. So yeah, here's a question that I like the range here. Most of my waking hours, I know some folks who are incredibly dedicated, and they're really crucial to making these organizations run. So at least monthly looks like it's looking like the most prevalent one there. And then Amanda, is there another question after this one for this one?
I think the other two are the INHS related ones.
Okay, great.
So I'll stop this one at, look, we have 100% or 98% participation. So
okay, great. Thank you all. So yeah, it's great to see so much engagement in taking care of the lands that we have around here. So, all right. Okay. All right. So a little bit more about me. So, what is this idea of being a state biologist? So there are, at the bottom there, you see there's 6 other state scientists, all housed within the Prairie Research Institute. There's a state archaeologist, a state climatologist, state hydrologist, and some of these positions are quite old. For example, the state entomologist, so a person who studies insects, that position was established in 1867. But my position was only established by the General Assembly in 2008 as part of the bill that put the Natural History Survey and the other state surveys in the University of Illinois. So this is the text here of that, which pretty much just describes my being the director of the Natural History Survey. And so my own take on this was that I wanted it to be about communication. So about sharing information that not only Illinois Natural History Survey scientists, but scientists across Illinois are providing that help us to better understand and conserve and manage the biological resources that we have here. So last year in 2 years ago now, 2020, I established a Twitter account, the IL Biologist handle, and people can also email me at biologist@illinois.edu. And so my role, I really feel, is to help share objective information. Okay, and that's something that creates a bit of tension in terms of my role as the state biologist versus my role as a citizen of the state. And so today I'm going to be wearing my state biologist hat, which means I'm going to be talking about information. So what do we know about a question? And not so much about what is the best route or what is the best policy, or how should people value the resources that we have here. And we'll see that leads to some tension with some of the questions that I got, which is great. I think it's important to discuss this distinction between what the science can tell us versus societal questions that are not necessarily science. They can use the information based on science, but science is not the end all and be all about those questions. So when I said it was humbling to talk about this, the Illinois Natural History Survey predates the University of Illinois. It was established as the Illinois Natural History Society back in 1858. And although it has been located on the University of Illinois campus since the late 1880s, it's actually been part of a bunch of different state agencies over the decades, most recently the part of the Department of Natural Resources in the state. And although the main headquarters and most of the work is going on campus here in Champaign, the survey has 7 established field stations covering nearly the breadth of the state, from our Lake Michigan Biological Station up on the shores of Lake Michigan in Zion, to the Great Rivers Field Station in Alton, and the Sam Parr Biological Station in Salem, and a bunch of others in between, including 2 in Havana on the Illinois River. So we've got a lot of coverage across the state. And then along with my position, that same statute created the Prairie Research Institute at the University of Illinois. And that now houses all of the other state surveys, the Geological Survey, Archaeological Survey, Water Survey, and the State Sustainable Technology Center. So our mission is to investigate and document the biological resources of Illinois and other areas. We're not just working in Illinois, to acquire and provide natural history information that can be used to promote the common understanding, conservation, and management of these resources. The research that's gone on and the work that's gone on in the Natural History Survey over these decades and today is so broad as to defy categorization, but I will do so anyway. And at least, and understanding that this really is a very imperfect set of categories, because there's a bunch of other stuff that doesn't neatly fit within this. And I know I'm leaving stuff out. So let's go from there. So a lot of the work that's gone on in the Natural History Survey over the decades has focused on the rivers and lakes and wetlands and waterways of the state. Most recently, a lot of this is focused on invasive species such as the invasive carp, silver, and big-headed carp, not only studying their effects and their ecology, but also how to manage them, the effectiveness of different approaches for managing them. But also studying the food webs of these water bodies, everything from plankton up to top predator fish. And one of the other things that I want to sort of emphasize is the long-term repeated standardized surveys that the Illinois Natural History Survey does. In terms of aquatic monitoring, we've been involved in the long-term resource management program and the long-term electrofishing programs on the big rivers in Illinois since 1989 and 1990. By going through the same places, using the same methods every year, this provides the kind of reliable baseline data that can be used to detect things like, for example, our scientists have observed the changes and improvement in diversity of fish communities after passage of the Clean Water Act. And conversely, we have been able to document the negative impacts of the huge problems caused by invasive carp on native fish and mussel species. The history in terms of wildlife ecology is at least as well established. One of our biological stations, the Forbes Biological Station in Havana, has been conducting the world's longest continuous aerial monitoring program for waterfowl. It's been going on since 1948. And there have been only 5 observers during that time. So very consistent collection of data. A lot of focus on birds and their ecology across the state, as well as reptiles and amphibians. But we also have an important, we run the Illinois Bat monitoring program as well. So those are looking at the terrestrial animals across the state is pretty important. Another broad category is plant biology and plant-insect interactions. This is smashing a whole lot of work together. Historically, economic entomology has been a major focus of the Illinois Natural History Survey, especially looking at agricultural pests. And that continues today with the Agricultural Pest Monitoring Program and focused research on specific pests like the corn rootworm there. But more recently, that's been broadened to look at pollinators such as the endangered rusty patch bumblebee or monarch butterflies and other pollinators as well. But our botanists also go out and do floristic surveys. They survey the plant communities in different types of habitats like Illinois dunes and ravines along the Lake Michigan area here on the left versus some of our upland forests in the middle patch here, looking at where we can track things like what are the effects of deer herbivory on the plant communities over time. Also, we have a long-running emphasis on medical entomology, which is the study of insects and ticks that carry diseases to people. And some of this work is funded through, if you've ever bought tires, you know that there's a waste used tire disposal fee that's associated with that. And the problem is that used tires sitting around provide breeding habitat for mosquitoes. And our entomologists go out there and actually survey for tick and mosquito communities in the outdoors as well as people's backyards, and also look for disease-causing pathogens in those animals and help alert the Department of Public Health. Another major component of what we do is surveys and assessments. So anytime the Department of Transportation has a big construction project, we go in and ensure that there's compliance with environmental laws. We look for example, if there's a bridge that's going to be demolished, are there bats using that bridge that might be threatened or endangered that would be displaced? And also, how does the habitat management along tollways in the Chicago area, for example, wetland mitigation? If a wetland has to be flattened out or filled for a project and they create a new wetland, is that ecologically similar to the original wetland? Our scientists are out there working on that. On the right here, you can see what's called the Critical Trends Assessment Program, or CTAP. And that is a rigorously designed statewide survey of plants, birds, and insects that our biologists visit these sites repeatedly. It's now in 25 years, where we have information that can answer questions like, what's happening to the kinds of flowers that pollinators rely on early in the spring? Another major category is biodiversity and systematics. So what are the species that we have out there, not only in Illinois, but elsewhere? And that involves collections of specimens. INHS curates almost 10 million individual specimens. And some of our collections are world renowned. And these are used to help identify what our biologists are constantly naming new species, reassessing sort of the relationships among the species. And even we're one of the primary sort of hosts of what's called the Catalog of Life effort, which is a global effort to identify all of the species that have been named. Not only do we not know how many species there are, we don't actually know how many species have been named, because in many cases, the same species has been named by more than one person. It's different names. So their work is to sort out all of those ambiguities and provide a definitive list of the species that have been described. All right, so before we go on to questions, now is when we can launch that other poll and ask a little bit about your familiarity with Natural History Survey and any information that you might be interested in learning more about. So the first question is about some of the products and services that INHS provides. So we publish field manuals. We work with the Sea Grant to provide resources about controlling aquatic invasive species like zebra mussels or milfoil and things like that. The Agricultural Pest Survey, as indicated, provides information to farmers about what pests are out and at what time of year. Hunters often use the aerial waterfowl survey results to monitor the migration of waterfowl through the state. We have a number of books, white papers, and reports that sort of synthesize information that's been collected over many years. And it used to be a bigger component of what we did, but we provided educational material. And we still do conduct quite a bit of outreach and educational events, although that has been hampered by COVID over the past couple of years. Folks use our specimen collections to view material, but also to look at things like where is a species been collected from in the state, to look at distribution data. And those sorts of databases, like mentioned on the bottom, some people find useful for, and I'll tell you a specific example. So when I was thinking about finding a real job, and I was going to apply to this faculty position at SIU Carbondale, one of the things I looked at was the habitats of Illinois. And I looked on the map and I'm like, well, you know, okay, well, I originally thought, well, Illinois is Chicago plus corn, right? And then I noticed there's all these cool, you know, natural areas, especially in the southern part of the state around Carbondale. And then I saw the list of reptiles and amphibians of Illinois, which is still on the INHS website. And that indicated there's almost 40 species of snakes in Illinois. And to a snake grabber like myself, this was like, yes, this is very cool. So it literally, that database was part of the reason why I applied for the job at SIU. All right.
We just have one more question, and it's about the citizen science opportunities.
Great, thank you. So INHS conducts a number of, conducts a number of different ways that people can get involved with collecting data on the animals, plants, fungi of the state. We have bird surveys like the Moon monitoring of owls and nightjar surveys. We help lead Christmas bird count, breeding bird surveys. Also, if you've ever had a hunting or fishing license in the state, then you may have been selected for some of the surveys that are conducted by the Natural History Survey. We're going to see a bit later how some of those data are really useful, not only just for managing the animals and fish that people hunt and angle for, but also other species as well. Our collections in particular are always looking for volunteers to help curate specimens, and especially over the past decade, we've really gotten into big efforts to digitize our collections so that information about the specimens is available not only to people who can physically come to campus, but around the world. Our agricultural pest surveys is focusing on spotted lanternfly, an invasive species well established in the Northeast, but not here yet. And then there's work on pollinators, reporting bat roosts. And then that bottom one should say iNaturalists projects. So for any of you have used the iNaturalist app, a number of our biologists lead sort of projects on that app to consolidate information about species that have been observed in various taxonomic groups like orchids or grasses or sedges in Illinois, as well as particular places. And iNaturalist has also been the format by which we've helped to lead BioBlitzes in the state, which is where people and experts descend on a place and try to count as many species as they can in one day. So looks like a number of you have taken part in those as well. So contacting me or the Natural History Survey, we can provide some more information about these kinds of opportunities. Thanks, Amanda, for putting these together. And I'm gonna move on from there. Okay. All right. So, oops, there we go. Okay. So I did get, we got a fair number of questions ahead of time that people sent in. I'm not going to be able to answer all of them. But I'm going to try to take a stab at some of these. Some of them are going to be in more depth than others. but hopefully it'll be fun. Now, one thing I want to make sure that you know ahead of time is I don't know it all. Biology is a huge thing, but I know a lot of people who know a lot more than me. And so that helps a lot. So some of these questions I can look up afterward elsewhere. But one of the categories of questions that I got was about a subject near and dear to my heart, which is predators and prey. And people are often very fascinated by predators, and this is so not surprising there. So first question is about predators that visit bird feeders. And this is a phenomenon that people have noticed for a while, that hawks will key in on bird feeders. And are they looking to eat the squirrels and chipmunks or other birds? And it depends on the kind of hawk. So we have in Illinois 2 species of hawks, the sharp-shinned hawk and Cooper's hawk, that are really kind of specialized on birds. They predate on birds. And so they will really home in on bird feeders and try to pick birds off that are unwary and hanging at the bird feeders. There's even some indication they might try to flush them into windows to get them to crash into the window and then have easy pickings afterward. But that's kind of anecdotal, but they certainly do key in. The songbirds are keying in on the feeders as the source of food, but so are the predatory birds as well. The next 2 questions deal with top carnivores in the state. And here we have to recognize the fact that the animals that we have in the state right now are not those that were here historically. Historically, there were wolves, there were mountain lions, there were bears in Illinois. All of them were removed from the state as European settlers moved in. And so currently then we have top carnivores that are much smaller. So first question is about cat species. What cat species do we have in Illinois? We have one species of wild cat in Illinois, and that's the bobcat. Although we have plenty of domestic cats running around feral as well. Bobcats are found throughout the state, and their population is growing rapidly. They're much more abundant in the southern part of the state and southwestern part of the state, but they are found across the state. What I expect to see in the future is that their population will continue to rise, but eventually level off. I'm not sure how long that will take, but they are doing well. So that question sort of suggests that there might be possibility of other cat species. To the north of us, there's the Canada lynx, but they don't get this far south. To the south of us, jaguars, ocelots, and occasionally jaguarundis make it into the very southern part of the United States, but they don't make it here. The only other possibility is mountain lions. I get a lot of interest in the possibility of mountain lions in the state. And we know that there's an established population of mountain lions in South Dakota and also far western Nebraska, but those are really the closest ones. The thing is, though, the mountain lions can move long distances, particularly young males. A young male mountain lion from South Dakota traveled all the way to Connecticut before it was killed by a car. And in Illinois, we have had 6 confirmed instances of mountain lions in the state since 2002, or since 2000. The most recent being in 2014. Now we get a lot, we meaning me, the Department of Natural Resources, other biologists get a lot more reports of sightings than that. But to really confirm this, we need a carcass or a very clear picture or a very clear track. And so the last instance of that was back in 2014. Now, cougars mountain lions are moving their way slowly eastward. And given that they can move huge distances, it's certain that they will cross the state again, but we do not have a breeding population of cougars in the state. Lots of bobcats and lots of coyotes. So I'm going to move to the next slide and talk a bit about these, our 2 top predators. So our top predators here are not that big. 20 to 25 pounds for bobcats for adults, 25 to 35 pounds average for coyotes. These are not huge. they're different ecologically. Coyotes are more of an omnivore. They eat a lot of plant material. For example, when persimmons are available, coyote poop is almost filled with persimmon pits, whereas bobcats are pretty much strict carnivores. They eat mainly mammals and birds, but also reptiles as well. So the data here I'm showing you on the right are data collected by Illinois archery deer hunters. And the archery season for deer is much longer than the firearm season, and it's much less effective than firearm hunting. So hunters spend a lot more time in the woods if they're hunting deer with archery equipment than with firearms. So this provides a basis for people to look at, for example, how many coyotes does the average hunter see per hour sitting in the field? How many bobcats? So INHS has been working with the Department of Natural Resources for this long-term data set on what hunters have seen. So it's important to have a good representative sample of hunters and to correct for how long they're spending in the field. But what you can see here is, first off, if you look on the vertical axis here, we're looking at a huge range of sightings. Each of these ticks is a multiple of 10. All right. So what we can see is coyotes have been increasing since the 1990s, but not that rapidly. Bobcat populations, on the other hand, have been screaming up. They've been increasing by well over a factor of 10 since the 1990s. They are doing much better than they were not very long ago. But there are consequences. And one of the things in the dog family is that it's all about size. So wolves beat up on coyotes, coyotes beat up on foxes. When wolves were removed from the landscape, that provided an opportunity for an opportunistic species like coyotes to become abundant and start to exert more of their beating up on foxes. And we've been seeing declines in fox populations over the past decades as well. And I've been involved in research that more specifically looked at how, on a spatial basis, the presence of coyotes is predictive of either the absence of gray foxes in particular, or gray foxes becoming absent over time. So coyotes are, like I said, they're an omnivore, but they can have pretty substantial impacts on other species that they interact with. They eat baby birds, they eat grown-up birds, they eat fawns, they eat lots of other stuff. So people have a lot of feelings about coyotes in the state. Coyotes are an unprotected species basically in the state. The hunters can hunt for them almost year round without any kind of bag limit. What that top line is telling us is that it is not stopping. It's not causing a decline in the population. So the population can withstand this kind of pressure from people. But it's also, it's unclear how the population would be different if the hunting regulation was more strict, for example. And both with the impacts of hunting on the coyotes, as well as farmers, for example, shooting them to protect their livestock, as well as the impacts of coyotes on their prey, we have to deal with an important thing called compensation. And that is that, for example, we know that coyotes are the primary predator on white-tailed deer fawns. So that suggests if you remove the coyotes, then all the baby deer should survive, right? And it turns out no. Multiple studies now show that there's little effect, if any, of removing coyotes on survival of fawns. If the fawns aren't killed by coyotes, oftentimes they die of something else. And this either means that the coyotes are picking out the fawns that would have died otherwise, or else they are, by removing some fawns, it's providing more resources that help the remainder survive along the way. And similarly, when hunters remove coyotes, they are territorial, and pretty much as soon as the territory is vacant, more coyotes will try to take over the area. And so it's not a terribly effective at reducing the population. And also oftentimes when the population does get reduced a little bit of coyotes, their reproductive rate goes up. and counterbalances that. So both the impacts of hunting on coyotes and coyotes on their prey, there's a lot of compensation that goes on there so that it's tough to tease out just how much impact is happening. All right. Okay. Another group of questions that people provided was looking at invasive and pest species. So Bradford pears have been in the press quite a bit recently as a very problematic invasive species. The Illinois Extension actually provides a nice list of replacements such as redbud, which I love, American plum or serviceberry as replacements for Bradford pears. Second question deals with wild pigs and armadillos in central Illinois. So wild pigs have been a problem in Illinois in the past. And there was at one point an established population around Effingham and where's my list here? Fulton counties. The Department of Natural Resources and Department of Agriculture combined to basically eradicate that population. There's also a population in Pike County that was eradicated. However, in the past couple of years, they've detected wild pigs in Pope County in far southern Illinois. Wild pigs can be really disruptive ecologically. They root through the leaf litter in forests, really disturbing changing the decomposition cycle, as well as affecting plant populations in woods. They also cause a lot of agricultural damage, so they're kind of a big problem. Armadillos, on the other hand, are moving into the state naturally. And they've been here in Illinois since the 1990s. They've been documented as far north as near Chicago, although they don't appear to have sustained populations that far north. We expect that as climate changes, that their breeding populations will march further and further north. They can tear up people's lawns, but otherwise don't seem to cause big ecological problems there. The next one, what's the best method of goose control, is a question I can't answer because that's a question about what you mean by best. And geese can cause major problems in terms of just pooping everywhere and causing unsightliness, but also impacting water quality and leading to bacterial problems in water bodies as well. Interestingly, the kinds of geese that cause these problems in Illinois are a subspecies called the giant Canada goose. This is the non-migratory population of geese we have in the state. That subspecies was thought to be extinct until a natural history survey biologist discovered a population of them in 1962 at a city park in Minnesota. And it turns out they're very well adapted to urban, suburban kinds of environments. They like golf courses, they like corporate campuses, they like strip malls. If it has a little retention pond, borrow pit nearby, they do just great there. People have tried lots of different things to try to control them. The problem is that if there's no predators there, they will breed almost anywhere as long as there's water. So the best method is tough to come up with. People are using dogs to chase them away. They use that also to keep them out of airports. One of the things I can tell you is that some people have tried removing or what's called addling or oiling eggs, where you take the egg and basically either shake it so that the embryo is not viable, or oil it, put oil on it so it can't live anymore. Problem is that these geese can live over 20 years. And so if there's already too many geese, then preventing them from laying eggs, unless you're 100% effective, doesn't work very well. So I can tell you what isn't a very effective method, but I can't really tell you what's the best method. Muskrats, pros and cons of having them on your dam. Well, on the dam, it's pretty much all con. They will dig tunnels that weaken the dam and cause erosion. On the other hand, having them in a marsh can be beneficial because in many cases, kind of left undisturbed, tall vegetation like cattails will march in and close out the open water in a marsh, muskrats open up areas from that emergent vegetation and help maintain the kinds of habitat that some kinds of species like. The last one, what can I do or plant in my yard that can help encourage native birds while repelling invasives? Well, these invasive species, house sparrows and starlings, generally nest in human-created cavities. So corners of eaves that have a little opening. At SIU, when I was working down there for a long time, there was a covered breezeway that had these columns, and the columns were hollow. And when they tore it down, there were years and years and years and years and years of starling nests that they had been using these columns where literally every post had a nesting starling in there. So removing, if you can, those openings that are available for house sparrows and starlings is the best way to go. It's tough to provide food that would be available to native species and not to these species. Okay, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to zoom through a few things. Why do sycamore trees violently shed their bark in some years? I don't know. That would be so cool to find out. Where do the plants that comprise pre-settlement tallgrass prairie come from? That's a 10,000 year process of species moving on the wind by their seeds, being carried by animals by their seeds, and then sorting themselves out ecologically to the species that can coexist with each other, especially given the fact that we now know that pre-European humans, Native Americans, were very active in manipulating their environment and did a lot to promote fire on the landscape. So that helped to sort the species that could exist in that environment from those that couldn't. Raccoons, 2020 seem to have a much greater population than 2021. Good question. We know raccoons are susceptible to diseases like canine distemper that can cause outbreaks and drop their populations. Fortunately, we don't have the raccoon variant of rabies in Illinois, although we do have it in bats and occasionally shows up in skunks. But canine distemper would be my best guess as to why you might have seen the population fluctuating dramatically over between years. And then in the bottom, we talked about one already. What's a species that's sensitive to climate change? We have a bunch of southeastern species that just get into Illinois, and we expect to see them start to march forward. Armadillos are doing it now. Swamp rabbits are found at their northernmost extent in southern Illinois, and we've documented that snowfall is one of the limiting factors that cause mortality events in that species. As snowfall events become less common, we expect to see that population expand northward as well. But one of the biggest, most sensitive things that people are looking at is timing of flowering plants. And our biologists are out there looking at that as well. It's called phenology. And that turns out to be a very sensitive indicator of climate change over time. So those are the questions that I had prepared answers to ahead of time. But I hope that we have some in the chat that we can work on and go through there as well. So Sue, what do we got for here?
All right. Sandra asked if it has been determined what was killing the birds in Indiana last year in Illinois, perhaps the mystery illness that Indiana announced.
Good question. I haven't heard a solution to that mystery of what's been killing the birds there. So I'll have to look into that.
Kathy was wondering whether you see a chance for apex predators moving into the state, like mountain lions and bears.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I've been involved tangentially with some research looking at habitat suitability for those species in the state. Bears in particular, we have a good amount of habitat that they could live in around the Shawnee National Forest, in particular in southern Illinois. It's going to take a while. One of the things that we know about black bears and cougars in particular is that females typically don't disperse. And you need females in order to have a breeding population. Males will disperse willy-nilly all the way to Connecticut, for example. And so, for example, like this past year, there was a young male bear that crossed Illinois. The year before, there was the one that came down, Bruno, that came down from Wisconsin and went into Missouri. But there's suitable habitat for bears that we could potentially have a breeding population in the state. It'll probably be decades before they get here in a way to do that. But the mountain lions are one where probably there's habitat here, but people are unlikely to be accepting of living in the state with them. And so I suspect that they will continue to move through the state. Most of the state is really not habitat for them. They have much bigger home ranges, for instance, than bears. So we would expect could have a smaller population size over time. So, yeah.
Charlie, sorry.
I see one about vultures preying on livestock. So that's another species that had been a sort of a southeastern species, the black vulture, that is now dramatically expanding its range into northern areas and have become much more abundant in Illinois than it was previously. And yes, they have been documented not only just to feed on carrion, but they will attack calves and actually kill them. I don't know if it's been documented in Illinois, but I know it's been documented in Kentucky. So livestock growers are concerned about that. So yeah, vultures, that's something we're going to keep an eye on.
We have a question about the 2021 deer harvest was reported to approximately 71,000. And this is lower than the 2020 deer hunting harvest. Are these part of the coronavirus deer testing project in the state, or are live deer captured and tested?
Good question. Live deer are not captured and tested, and we're just starting in the state a coronavirus testing program within there. So this is one of these things where we don't really know whether the virus may have caused the population of deer to drop. It seems unlikely because basically in captive conditions where they've had it, and we know they're vulnerable to getting infected and they have mild symptoms for the most part. It seems unlikely it would have caused a die-off within the state. We do know that 2020 had a massive increase in the number of people hunting in Illinois because of lockdowns associated with coronavirus. Massive increase in participation in hunting in the state. So it may have been that the deer harvest was higher that year because there were so many more people out hunting. And maybe the sort of going back to what now constitutes normal-ish, we may have seen fewer people having the time and opportunity to hunt. So that might be that going on. But those are questions we need more information on.
Thank you. And Anne was wondering if you are aware of any plans to have a roadside management program like in Iowa, where they minimize mowing and maximize native plants.
I know there are some areas in Illinois where there are roadside, prairie strips that they mow less. But as sort of is always the case with Illinois, we're the prairie state, and yet prairies now represent, far less than 1% of the original coverage in the state. So I don't think it's a huge amount, and I would like to see more, personally, more programs like that.
As an aside, my understanding is the Champaign County Forest Preserve District is helping monitor prairie planting along the highway that is adjacent to one of our properties. So perhaps it's a regional thing. Dale wanted to add to your information about the hunting increase that bow hunters in particular were very active in 2020. Anne was wondering about Bell Bull Prairie, and this might be the last question. Just wondering what the INHS their involvement with it.
Yeah, so our department is providing information about the prairie species that are there and sort of their ecology and what they need to survive. But again, our role as sort of scientists to the state is to provide that information and not necessarily set policy. And so that is, our role there is to help, document what are the species that are there, what do they need to have viable populations. All right.
Well, we will be sending out a follow-up email that will include some links to information about the Natural History Survey and the Prairie Research Institute, as well as an evaluation form that we would really appreciate folks to complete. And we would like to thank Dr. Schauber so much for joining us. We're grateful that you were able to share your insight and expertise with our ecological volunteers and community members from across the state. So folks, please look for a follow-up email. And thank you all very much for joining us.
Yes, and thank you again, Sue and Amanda. This was wonderful, and hope to do something like this again. So.